It is February 7th, 2025, and as we've been following this week, the rhetoric from Trump and from Netanyahu during their talks in DC, I want to take a step back and look at the broader region and their response to those talks and to those comments that were made. Because you've got countries like Egypt and Jordan, right? They are the ones who are being directly threatened by Trump. He's claiming that not only is he going to expel nearly 2 million Palestinians from their land somehow, but that he's going to force them on other regional countries like Egypt and Jordan. Well, now they're speaking out. They're saying we can't possibly let that happen. And they're talking to other regional countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And you're seeing the region come together in a way, not because they really care about the Palestinians, but because they realize that if they go along with the latest plans cooked up by the US and Israel, then it is going to lead to regional instability at home. Because all of the people in their publics who have put up with this ongoing genocide for the last 16 months, well, forcing the Palestinian people to leave their homes and forcing them on regional countries is something that could finally lead the public to rise up against their governments and to realize once and for all what their governments actually care about. So what does that mean for the region and where could we see things go? Well, we got into all of the latest with a special guest earlier, so let's take a listen to that conversation now. Joining me now to discuss is Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Now, I'm happy to be able to get your take on a few different things. I figured we would dive into the latest tensions between the US and Iran first, because we have Trump in this position where he has wasted no time in resuming the, quote, maximum pressure campaign against Iran, signing an executive order aimed at preventing Tehran from obtaining nuclear weapons and trying to suffocate its oil exports. Yet Trump also claims that he's ready for talks immediately. And in response, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, rejected the idea of holding talks with the Trump administration, saying that experience had shown that it was not rational, intelligent, or honorable to do so, and the negotiations with America do not solve any of our problems. So how do you view the current tensions and where Iran stands?
Technically, it wasn't an executive order, but that's not really important. What is, I think, important to keep in mind is that the maximum pressure campaign continued under Biden. Biden never removed any of the sanctions. He continued to increase the sanctions against Iran during the 4 years of his presidency. And so nothing has been removed since Trump was president 4 years ago. And all he can do is do what Biden is doing and just add new people after new companies are made, add those companies and those people in those companies to the sanctions list. But Iran has gone a long way in developing its trade and business through circumventing U.S. financial institutions and the U.S. dollar. The same is true with Russia. The Russians have learned a lot from Iran because Iran has many years of experience due to the maximum pressure sanctions. And the Russians, too, are now much more capable of circumventing U.S. financial institutions and the U.S. dollar. But we have to see what Trump tries to do. He may, for example, try to block ships or use piracy in the high seas to take ships. But that's also been something that Biden tried and tested, and Iran retaliated. And Iran took other ships. They took Western oil tankers. And after that, Western countries had to back down. So it's difficult to see what Trump will do. The fact is that the world has changed. And this is a very different world that we live in today than what he experienced when he was president last time round. The United States is definitely much weaker than before. Its allies are very, very much weaker. The global south, or the global majority, is on the rise, and Iran has developed ties with these countries. With regards to, or stronger ties with these countries, with regards to what Ayatollah Khamenei said, I think he said that based on experience. We did a nuclear deal with the United States in 2015. From day one, Obama violated it, and Trump then tore up the deal. So how can we trust the Americans? Then we saw the experience that the Russians had with the Minsk Accords, where the Americans, well, where the Europeans, of course, under American guidance, they never were serious about implementing it, as we later found out from Merkel's interview and Hollande's interview and the interview of the former Ukrainian president. And now, with regards to the ceasefire in Lebanon, the United States is a guarantor. But the Israeli regime is constantly violating the ceasefire. They just killed a Hezbollah member along with his 3 daughters. The U.S., if it's a guarantor, but it's allowing the Israelis to do whatever it wants, how can we trust the United States at the negotiating table? How can we work with them? How can we agree on anything? And then in Gaza, we saw Trump say very openly that the 3rd phase of the ceasefire deal is not going to be implemented. If that's the case, and again, the United States is the guarantor, then how can anyone deal with the United States? How can we come to any agreement with the United States? How can we ever be sure that Trump will implement that agreement? So I think that when we look at the track record of Washington, and especially Trump, I don't see any reason how we can possibly negotiate with him and expect to get positive results. All we can expect is to have our hands burned.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you bring up the fact that, when it comes to Obama or Biden, I think the media tries to act like they were more quote unquote friendly to Iran, or like they wanted to work with Iran, but that wasn't entirely the case. And especially in Biden's case, he ran on this platform of criticizing Trump for tearing up the nuclear deal. And then he gets back into office and does nothing to try to either go back to the old deal or create some kind of new deal. And so the mainstream media in the West has this focus on this claim that, Trump is really going to take on Iran in some way. But exactly as you pointed out there, this is not the world that we were living in 8 years ago. So when it comes to the position that Iran is in, watching someone like Trump, sitting there this week saying, the U.S. is going to take over the Gaza Strip, right? He's sitting there alongside Netanyahu, and he's making statements promoting ethnic cleansing, promoting a continued genocide against the Palestinian people, which Iran has made it very clear that they are against. So how do you think that the region then looks at Trump when he's not even playing the game that Biden played, where he acted like, we'll get a ceasefire? No, Trump is basically saying, I don't care. I want that land.
I don't think we should expect anything different. We know who Trump is and how he behaves. And last time around, that's exactly how he behaved too. He's not any worse than Biden or any better. After all, Biden carried out a genocide. He carried out a Holocaust in Gaza. And till the very end, he was facilitating it. Trump, his comments on Gaza are outrageous. They are shameless. They're immoral, unacceptable, and they should be widely condemned. And they are being widely condemned. However, in this particular case, I think actually, and I'm just speculating, I'm just guessing, I don't think Trump is really serious. I think what he wants to do is he wants the ceasefire to continue, the 3rd phase aside, but he wants the 2nd phase to continue. I don't think he wants renewed fighting. And Netanyahu has promised his coalition partners to go back to war. So here, there's a problem. Do you go back to war? Do you have a ceasefire? I think so. What Trump did is he gave Netanyahu some concessions. Some of them were, of course, obvious and were expected, like the bunker busters, which are used to slaughter people. And probably he gave him some concessions in the West Bank, which we may hear about later. But we already see the brutality in the West Bank increase. But I think he spoke about the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, basically to give a gift to Netanyahu, not a real gift, but a gift where he can take home and tell because Netanyahu is weak, and right now Trump has the upper hand. That may change later, but Netanyahu is a weakened person. He hasn't succeeded in the war in Gaza. He's achieved nothing in Lebanon, nothing in the Red Sea. He doesn't have anything to show, and to his coalition partners as success. And he is also sick, and he looks frail in Washington. So at the moment, Trump has the upper hand. And I think what he did was he gave Netanyahu this gift so that he could take it back to his extremist allies and say, look, we're going to expel the Palestinian people. And that would allow, again, I'm speculating, the second phase of the ceasefire to continue. I don't think right now Trump wants war. It's not in his interest. I may be wrong, but I think that's how it is. That, of course, does not decrease the shamelessness of the ugliness of the comment of the statements and the immorality of what he proposed. But I think his objective here is probably not the literal ethnic cleansing of Gaza, but rather to keep Netanyahu in power, because all of this genocide, this Holocaust carried out by Netanyahu was for self-interest. I think he's damaged the Israeli regime irreversibly. The world has turned against the regime, and they've achieved very little on the battlefield, but he has remained in power. And so Trump is helping him to, I think, to stay in power and preserve the ceasefire because it's in Trump's interest. I may be wrong, but that's how it looks to me, because there's no way that the United States is going to expel the Palestinian people. They've survived the Holocaust because they were unwilling to leave, and the world won't accept, and as if this war is renewed, I think the reaction in the international across the international community will be much more severe than last time around, because people are just sick and tired of this.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And that's an interesting point. I appreciate that you bring that up, because I'm with you. I mean, this idea that, oh, we're going to expel the Palestinians from their homes at this point after the 16 months of hell on earth that they have endured, not only is that not logical, but that is going to lead to a lot of dead, either Israeli soldiers or American soldiers, based on whoever would decide to get involved. But thinking of it as the idea that, okay, maybe Trump was trying to give Netanyahu something to take back to his genocidal maniac far-right officials, well, you now have Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, coming out and saying that he has told the military that they should prepare exit options by land, sea, and air so that anyone who wishes to can leave for any country willing to accept them, bringing up that maybe we should force Palestinian refugees to go to Spain, Norway, Ireland, and other countries who have been critical of Israel's genocide. This just feels so unserious to me at this point, right? I'm looking at these statements, and initially I was going, okay, Trump, what are you doing? Now we've reached the point where I'm going, okay, none of you are being serious about any of this. You're basically just saying whatever comes to mind and throwing it out there at this point. But obviously, at the heart of it is the suffering of the Palestinian people that would endure no matter what happened. Obviously, they're in a position where, with the Gaza Strip that they have now, I mean, Israel has made it hell on earth, so they are dealing with devastation all around. How do you look at this situation and kind of where it proceeds from here, and how this distraction, this latest distraction of, oh, we're just going to expel the Palestinians, is being used to take away from the very real suffering?
I think that what Trump did is that he hurt the United States a great deal. The international community is outraged. And in addition to that, the U.S. camp in the region, countries that are associated with the United States and whose populations are very unhappy because their governments have done nothing, they are being accused basically of complicity. They are being told by Trump that their governments are for the expulsion of the Palestinian people. And whether this is true or not is irrelevant. Many people in these countries who are already angry that their governments have done nothing, whether it's in Turkey, where they've actually facilitated the genocide through selling cheap oil or Baku oil to Israel, transporting it to Israel, or whether it's Jordan or Egypt or the Emirates or others. People are already angry because of their complicity. But now if there's suspicions that their government is actually colluding with the United States, even if even if Trump is lying, that destabilizes these governments. It decreases, it makes people more hostile, and it can help create instability. Remember, in 2011 and or around that period of time when we saw the rise of instability across the region, it was the result of a young man in Tunisia who burnt himself alive in protest because of a local grievance. It not only brought down the whole Tunisian government, but it brought down other governments, Egypt, and we had revolution and chaos and dirty wars across the region, across West Asia and North Africa. Today, the situation, I think, is much more dangerous than it was even back then. And so by supporting by making such statements, by helping the genocide, by bringing Al-Qaeda to power in Syria, Al-Qaeda is a threat to regimes in the American camp. They are the most vulnerable. The Saudis, the Egyptians, Jordan, even Turkey is vulnerable to Al-Qaeda in certain ways. And it's going to be a huge financial burden for Turkey, by the way, and Qatar, because it's become a black hole after they've destroyed Syria. But in any case, all of this does not bode well for the United States in West Asia. And I think Trump's behavior so far is making things even more dangerous for his own side.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point there, because you have these regional countries, right, where their governments have been very careful for the last 16 months. They make it sound like they want to see a ceasefire. They want the Palestinians to stop being bombed by Israel, but then they don't really do anything to try to make it happen. And they've been teetering, thinking, okay, as long as the public doesn't revolt. But exactly as you're pointing out there, if they go along with any of these plans, right, if Egypt or Jordan start accepting Palestinian refugees that are being forced at them by Israel, then their public could very well say, that's enough, we're done with this, and revolt against them. And so now you're seeing this pushback where I know Egypt came out and they said today that they had been in contact with Arab partners, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, to firm up the region's rejection of any displacement of Palestinians. So in a way, they look at this and they go, okay, now we really have to make a stand because we could be impacted. When it comes to the people of the region and how much they're willing to put up with from their governments, how do you see those regional tensions and kind of where they stand right now?
It's very difficult to say, because no one expected 15 years ago for the whole Arab world to be in upheaval within months and a couple of years. And no one expected to see some of these leaders who were there were in power for decades to just for their regimes to collapse. I think the situation, as I said earlier, is much more dangerous for them today than ever before, because the Holocaust in Gaza is unprecedented. We've never seen such a crime in human history in this way before, where it was carried out in front of the eyes of the world 24 hours a day, day after day, and the West was constantly trying to justify it. They were funding it, they were providing the weapons and the ammunition, and the whole world was looking on in horror. So the region is just as horrified, if not even more horrified than the rest of the world, because they're closer to where the slaughter has been taking place, and they see it on a daily basis in their social media feed. So I think the situation is not good. The combination of Al-Qaeda in power in Syria and the genocide in Gaza and Trump making these outrageous statements and the Israeli regime being unwilling to fulfill its obligations in accordance with the ceasefires in Lebanon and Gaza, all of these mean that the coming months could be very dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that that's good to keep in mind when we look at everything that we're hearing from all of these different regional leaders. Now, another thing that I did want to ask you about was another thing that happened very out in the open, and it really kind of sums up the US-Israel alliance, because this week, as Netanyahu was in DC, he gave Trump the gift of a golden pager meant to signify the terror attack that Israel carried out in Lebanon back in September, where exploding pagers and walkie-talkies made by Mossad killed dozens of people and left over 3,000 injured, including many children. What is the message that is really sent to the world where you have Israel and the US celebrating a terror attack that targeted primarily civilians?
Well, it's sort of like giving a statue of a beheaded baby to Trump. There's no difference, but there's nothing shocks me anymore. It doesn't even surprise me that he would do such a thing. The West has become, or the elites in the West have become so immoral and so genocidal that they will justify anything. For me, it is very easy to understand how World War II happened, how people were slaughtered across Europe and in Germany, how Slavs were massacred by the Germans. It's all easy to understand now as we see what's going on in the West, how for this last 16 months, the Western media has basically been promoting Netanyahu, justifying Netanyahu, supporting Netanyahu. Western diplomats have been working day and night to do what they can to strengthen the Israeli regime. Western media right now, as we speak, as people are being killed in the West Bank, the media is silent. As these Al-Qaeda terrorists are killing minorities in Syria, now in Lebanon, Western media is silent. I think they've been exposed, and I think that this makes the situation for the elites in the West and regimes in the West much more dangerous. People across the world see the behavior of Trump, of Netanyahu, and of course Biden before him. And the US soft power, European soft power, it's all been demolished. And of course, on the other hand, their economies are in serious trouble. The war in Ukraine is emptying their economic, it's weakening them, European economies economically, it's creating suffering across the West. And when it comes to China, they're losing the economic war against China. We saw DeepSeek, how it impacted U.S. markets. Things are not going well for the West, but they refuse to acknowledge or accept the fact that they're living in a bubble. And while they pretend that, I don't think they even pretend anymore that they support human rights or women's rights or freedom of speech. I think that they put aside the facade nowadays, and it doesn't bode well for the U.S. empire. All of these are small pieces that accumulate, and they help bring down the empire. And I just see that the fall of the U.S. empire as being inevitable.
Yeah, and you see that desperation, right? The more desperate that they get, the more dangerous that they get, the more brazen leaders here in the US are in not only calling for direct war, but calling for ethnic cleansing, making it clear that they support the exact same genocide that the Biden administration helped to carry out and helped to enable. And it's just a reminder that they're all on the same team, a reminder for us here at home and also for the rest of the world that is watching and living through it with us. I know that there is certainly a lot at stake here all around, and I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today to break down all of the latest here. Seyed Mohammad Marandi, a professor at the University of Tehran, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you for having me.
If anything in this video resonated with you, be sure to like it, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and as always, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to keep up with all of my work, make sure that you're subscribed to my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com. That's where you'll find ad-free videos and new weekly episodes of my exclusive series for paid subscribers called Sanction. You can also catch Sanction over on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.